Greetings everyone, I'm Stefan and this is the Ultimate Origins Power Tier List for Stellaris 2.6 and beyond. This Origins tier list ranks all of the Origins, including two very special cases, and the ranking is based solely on power level. So in Tier A we have a very high power level, in Tier B a medium power level, etc, etc. The Origins within a tier aren't ranked, so something like Common Ground is approximately as bad as Galactic Doorstep. I'll be explaining all the Origins in today's video, and I'll be talking about why certain Origins are bad and why certain Origins are much better. Now before we begin, I have to make a quick disclaimer. I am well aware of the fact that the developers did not intend to balance the Origins, and this tier list is simply there to just help anyone out that actually wants to look at the Origins as a power mechanic rather than a roleplay mechanic. Like, I know there's plenty of people out there who would just roleplay with these, but there's also plenty of people, like in multiplayer, who would like to use the most powerful stuff or are interested in knowing how to use certain Origins, and we'll be covering all of that in this video. Anyways, let's begin at the very bottom with Tier F. Tier F Origins are quite bad, and sometimes they even hurt you. For example, Common Ground here will start you in a Federation with two other Federation members. However, as you can see here, it's in Tier F. It is not that good. The reason why is because those two Federation members start off on your guaranteed habitable worlds, and they will also likely block off any sort of expansion. Here we have a pretty typical Common Ground start. Your Federation members spawn really close to you, and if you don't act fast, they will take the choke points, and you'll be left without anywhere to expand into. And even if you do take the choke points yourself, and expand yourself, and cuck your Federation, yeah, they're gonna be unhappy, and they're not gonna grow that well. So in the end, you're going to be left with two very weak one-planet empires, and they're probably going to be useless after year 30 or so. Granted, up to year 30, they are useful as a defensive tool. However, they're not useful as an offensive tool, because as of 2.6.3, AI is pretty bugged, and they cannot move their fleets to support you in terms of war. They can only defend you, but they cannot attack with you. So defensively, this is great, but if you're not looking for defenses, and you would rather just build a couple choke points, Common Ground isn't the way to go. Next on the list, we have Galactic Doorstep. Galactic Doorstep is really quite bad. All it does is give you early access to gateways, and although it might sound like a very good idea to have early access to gateways and to have extra mobility, you have to really pay for that extra mobility. The thing is, you don't get any discounts to gateways, and in fact, the one gateway you start with, you have to pay the full price to restore it. Like it's what is it, like 2,000 alloys and 6,000 energy credits just to restore the single gateway, which by itself is not going to do anything. Yeah, you do the math. Unless you're playing with like 5 times increased gateway spawns in the galaxy, Galactic Doorstep is not the way to go. Now I do have to mention that this origin will cause some stuff to happen. For example, at one point you will receive 500 alloys. At one point you will also get attacked by 1,000 fleet power fleet, so you better use those 500 alloys. And at another point, you're going to get both the gateway activation and the gateway construction technology. However, you get like 40% research in both of those technologies, so you have to do like 300 months of research early on to actually unlock the power of gateways. Moving on, at F tier, we have Post-Apocalyptic. This origin is really quite bad. It will do exactly what it tells you, and what it tells you is not that impressive. It will give you plus 70% to tomb world habitability, which you will almost never use. There are very few situations where you can find a sizable amount of tomb worlds in your near space, and oftentimes you find 0. Additionally, you get 10 years of extra leader lifespan, but that is effectively like half a trait point, because Enduring trait will give you 20 years of lifespan, and it only costs 1 point. So 10 years, it's nearly worthless. Post-Apocalyptic will also actively hurt you if you're playing some sort of Xenophile or some sort of Conqueror species, because if you try to resettle pops to your tomb world, yeah, that's not going to end well, because they're going to have 0 hab, and they're not going to produce anything. So it's much better to just play in a normal world than take Post-Apocalyptic and suffer when you can not actually resettle pops onto your main planet because, well, it's a tomb world. Next, we have Doomsday. Now, some people might argue that Doomsday is actually worse than nothing, because after 35 to 45 years, your planet will blow up, and you will lose all the pops that are still on the planet. However, it will give you some bonuses that you have to consider. Doomsday will give you a modifier in your home planet that will evolve over time. At first, you will receive minus 30% habitability and minus 10 stability. in exchange for plus 30% to alloys, minerals, and energy, the 3 resources you need to actually rush someone down and take their planets. Doomsday really is built for that sort of build because your overall bonuses to alloys, minerals, and energy are going to outweigh the penalties from habitability and stability. As you might notice on the tier list, Doomsday actually appears twice, once in F tier, which is for normal organics, and once in B tier, and that is for machines. The thing with machines is that they're completely unaffected by habitability, and so in the end you're trading 30 stability for plus 120% to alloys, minerals, and energy, the 3 resources that they use. So overall for machines this is very good, and if you're playing as a machine, Doomsday is actually a pretty viable option, but if you're playing as an organic and not a lithoid, you're going to be in a pretty bad spot. Starting off D tier, we have Mechanist. Now, Mechanist as an origin is nowhere as good as Mechanist as a Civic. First of all, you do not get extra pops at the beginning of the game. Mechanist, both as a Civic and now as an origin, used to replace some of your pops with robots. However, in 2.5, you actually got more pops total after the replacement, but now you just get your 8 pops replaced, and that's it. You just start off with the same amount of pops as anyone else. You also don't get any modifiers to extra chance to roll droids and synths later on, which was one of the biggest selling points for Mechanist before. Now all Mechanist does is literally just start the game with 8 pops being robots, and it will reduce upkeep by like 5%, which is honestly negligible. The one upside to Mechanist is that you do start off with a robot assembly plant on your home planet, which will provide you with some nice extra growth, but that extra growth will take place over time, and you are of course using pops to make those robots. Now granted, robot assembly jobs are one of the best jobs in the game because the growth they provide is quite nice, but you have to remember that as a Mechanist you are paying for this, and instead of being able to build an extra research plant, you are stuck with a locked building slot which is dedicated to robot assembly plants. The one and only under the hood good thing remaining about Mechanist is the fact that you do start off with robotic workers and powered exoskeletons researched as technologies. This means that you have researched 2 of the 6 technologies necessary to advance to tier 2 in engineering tech, and so you may get some techs earlier that are going to be better than those of your foes. However, this 2 tech advantage is not too significant, and Mechanist is down there in D tier. Moving on in D tier, we have Lost Colony. Now, this might initially seem like it does nothing for you, but really, if you start off the game, you will notice that your planet has a very nice modifier, Colonial Spirit. This modifier is actually quite decent. It will give 10% happiness, plus 15% to amenities, and extra resources and habitability. Now, you may notice that habitability is included on here, and that habitability on the home planet is actually not 100%. That is because you're technically a colony, and a colony does not have the same habitability as a homeworld. This origin pairs very well with the adaptable trait because of course extra 10% habitability will bring you to 100%, and you're going to get some pretty serious bonuses from Colonial Spirit. But even then, it is nowhere as good as Prosperous Unification, which is why it is in D tier, and Prosperous Unification, which we'll cover later, is in C. Now, one thing to mention about Lost Colony is that the empire that spawns from Lost Colony will grant you nothing of importance. They will not give you any gifts, they will not get any positive relations bonus, and the only way it's relevant that they are of the same species is if you're playing Fanatic Purifier and you're planning to spawn in another empire of the same species to actually diplomatically interact with them. Because as you might know, Fanatic Purifiers can interact with another empire of the same species, but unless you want to do that, the extra empire that spawns is not going to be really relevant to your experience. Next up in D tier, we have Calamitous Birth. Now, unless you're using Calamitous Birth in an exploity sort of manner, which I will cover later, Calamitous Birth by itself is not really that good. The main benefit to Calamitous Birth is not actually the lithoid meteorite ship that you're able to build, but instead the planetary modifier they get on your home planet. The main reason why you don't want to build a lithoid meteorite ship is because even though it is quite cheap, you do get a significant penalty for colonizing with it. When you colonize a planet with a lithoid meteorite, you will receive a minus 50% habitability to the planet. Let's take the best case scenario for Calamitous Birth to show its impact. So let's say you have a planet that is exactly of the same type as your home world, and normally if you're not playing as a lithoid, it would have 80% habitability. If you were to use the lithoid meteorite, you would get 80% habitability, and you would suffer a 10% penalty to growth speed, 10% penalty to pop resource production, and a 20% penalty to pop upkeep. If you were to instead buy a normal colony ship, you would avoid all those penalties, and you'll be able to colonize the planet as usual. Now, if you're planning to colonize the planet and get the extra pops from those tile blockers from the lithoid meteorite, you're going to have to pay a significant price. Each of those tile blockers will cost 1,000 minerals, and while you can reduce those numbers with certain governors and certain edicts, you're spending resources on those edicts and those governors, and so in the end, the cost of colonization is quite significant. Even in the best conditions, lithoid meteorites are not that good, and if you start getting to planets with like 50% habitability, yeah, you really should not use those meteorites because your habitability will tank, and overall your growth will suffer. The only possible use for the lithoid meteorite colony ship is if you were to colonize a planet, take all the pops from that planet, and then colonize it again. Even in that situation, the origin is B tier at most, and that's because there's a variety of costs associated with doing that. If you were to try the process of colonizing, resettling, and recolonizing without any sort of modifiers to your colony development speed or your clear blocker cost, you'll be paying about 700 minerals per pop, and your pops will be growing at a rate of 3 per month. That is effectively the same as you would get on a planet, so colonizing the planet and just going with it is much better than just spamming, colonizing, and recolonizing. You'll be wasting a lot of resources, and it will be a lot of micromanagement. Granted, if you do pull all the tricks in the book and get insane colony development speed and significantly reduced clear blocker cost, you will end up with a relatively good rate of about 300 minerals per pop, with a growth rate of about 11 per month. That is still not insane, and the amount of resources you sink into setting it up is quite significant. Plus, colonizing and recolonizing will effectively render the planet unusable because its habitability will go down to 0, and well, yeah, you're wasting a planet to get some pop growth speed, and that pop growth speed is going to be quite expensive. My advice is to only use that method for the memes. Moving on in Tier D, we have Life Seeded. Life Seeded will grant you a size 25 Gaia planet as your home world, and considering how you could do this with any sort of empire, including a megacorp, it is very good for roleplay. However, as a planetary spawn, it is not that good, but at the same time, it's not awful. You see, you will start with the Gaia world preference, meaning that your pops will not really be able to colonize other planets, but if you do sign a migration treaty and get other pops to colonize the other planets, you'll be in a pretty good situation. Your Gaia planet will start with 3 special features, one for gas, one for motes, and one for crystals, that will allow you to potentially produce strategic resources a bit earlier. However, considering the value of building slots on your home planet, you'll probably just want to build a single gas extraction well, and just go with that because building all 3 would consume 3 building slots, which you could be using for something else like research. Overall, you will effectively get approximately 15% to resources from jobs, because of course, biological pop happiness will translate into stability, which will translate into pop resource output. The only reason why Life Seeded is so low in the tier list is because there are other origins that are simply more overpowered. However, Resource Consolidation is not one of those origins. Resource Consolidation will start you off with a machine planet as your capital, but it is actually not that incredible as I first expected. The price to pay for this machine world is actually a lack of resources anywhere else in the system. Overall, you will start with approximately the same amount of resources as any other machine empire without any sort of machine world start, but you do get access to about 10% extra resources from jobs and reduced housing usage on your capital. The fact that it's a machine planet doesn't actually matter that much. Normally on your capital world, you will get plenty of valuable districts for both energy and minerals, and having machine world doesn't really change that significantly. Additionally, the only special feature that you get in your planet is consolidated resources, which gives you a little bit of minerals. But overall, a machine empire starting with resource consolidation is going to be weaker than an empire starting with prosperous unification. Moving on in Tier D, we have Socratic Evolution. Now, you might remember this being very high in the list for civics, but as an origin it is relatively alright. Socratic Evolution will allow you to start with 12 pops of a different species, and you actually get to design that species in the species editor. So you're going to be able to design a species, they're going to have one less potential trait pick and trait point, because they start off with serviles. Serviles will get plus 10% to happiness, and plus 10% to resources from jobs. However, you will run into some issues with ruler and specialist jobs, because serviles cannot work those jobs, and if they reproduce at the same rate as your main species, you're going to be in a position where your serviles are taken over, and you have no one to work those research jobs. That is not a situation you want to be in, and unless you carefully manage who grows where, it's much better off to just have a single species. The main advantage to having serviles is that they can be specialized. So for example, we can specialize the species to be industrious and agrarian, and your main species to be traditional and research focused. This specialization means you have effectively twice the amount of trait points to work with, but considering the downside of having two species grow alongside each other, and one of the species not being able to perform ruler or specialist jobs, overall it ends up being solidly in D tier. Now before I wrap up the video, there's one tip that I have to mention with Socratic Evolution. If you want your main species to grow a little bit more than your secondary species, you want to give your main species rapid breeders, and your secondary species slow breeders. But anyways, that'll do it for today. I expected to be able to cover all the origins in a single video, but it seems like I'll have to split it up and make 2 videos. So in the next one, we'll be covering all the top tier origins, and I'll be showing you some tips on how to use certain origins to get the most results. If you are interested, please consider subscribing, and if you really enjoy what I do, please join my Patreon. You'll also get early access to all the videos that I do, so I might see you a little bit sooner than usual. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.